They said she was a burden, a nobody, someone who'd never succeed. They dragged her out of her own brother's celebration like trash. But what they didn't know was that the woman they humiliated was holding the very key to their fortune. And with one signature, she froze everything they owned. The night was filled with golden lights, music, and laughter. The Dlamini mansion in Lagos looked like a palace, buzzing with guests who toasted to Kweku Dlamini's success. He was the family's pride, a man of wealth, style, and influence. Everyone celebrated him like royalty. But at the back of the hall, away from the glamour, stood his younger sister, Abeni. She wore a simple gown, nothing fancy, just clean and neat. In her hands was a small wrapped box, a gift she had saved for months to buy. Her heart beat fast as she stepped forward, smiling shyly, hoping her brother would at least be proud that she remembered him. Before she could speak, Kweku's wife, Toriro, laughed loudly and waved her hand with disgust. "Oh please, Abeni," she said, her voice cutting through the crowd. "Do you really think Kweku needs your cheap little present? This is a party, not a charity table." The laughter that followed felt like knives to Abeni's heart. People turned, whispering behind glasses of champagne. Her mother, sitting at the front, looked down and pretended not to see. Her father's voice was cold, sharp as ice. "You shouldn't have come," he muttered. Abeni froze for a moment, the gift trembling in her hand. The music played on, but for her the sound faded away. She forced a small, shaky smile, trying to hide the sting of humiliation. She had always known she was the outsider, the forgotten one, but she didn't expect to be embarrassed like this, in front of everyone. Kweku smiled awkwardly, pretending not to notice the tension, and turned back to his guests. "Let's continue the celebration," he said, raising his glass. Kweku smiled awkwardly, pretending not to notice the tension, and turned back to his guests. "Let's continue the celebration," he said, raising his glass. The crowd cheered again, drowning out the shame burning inside his sister. Abeni slowly stepped back, her eyes filling with tears. She clutched the small box tighter, her knuckles white. It wasn't just a gift. It was a handmade frame with their childhood photo inside. The last memory before everything changed. But now it felt meaningless. As laughter and music filled the air again, she turned toward the exit, her heart breaking quietly. The lights shimmered on her face, catching the tears she refused to wipe. She whispered under her breath, "One day they'll remember this night." And with that, she walked out into the darkness, unseen but not defeated. The music grew louder as Kweku took the stage, his smile wide and confident. Guests clapped and cheered as he raised his glass to thank everyone for coming. "Tonight," he said proudly, "we celebrate family, hard work, and success." The crowd erupted in applause. Abeni, standing near the back, smiled softly and joined in the clapping. Despite the hurtful words from earlier, she still loved her brother. She wanted to show she was proud of him. Gathering her courage, she began walking toward the stage, holding out her small gift once more. But before she could reach him, Toriro's hand shot out like a whip, gripping her wrist tightly. "Where do you think you're going?" she sneered, her voice dripping with disgust. Then she turned sharply toward the guards. "Security! Remove her from here. Right now." The laughter and music stopped. The whole room fell silent. Every eye turned toward Abeni as two security guards stepped forward. "Madam, please come with us," one said softly, but before she could speak, they grabbed her by the arms. Gasps filled the air as they began dragging her away. Abeni tried to steady herself, her heart racing, but one of her shoes slipped off. The sound of it hitting the marble floor echoed like a gunshot. Whispers rippled through the hall like poison. "How shameful," someone murmured. "Isn't that the sister who failed her studies?" Another voice added with a cruel chuckle. "She always brings drama wherever she goes." Abeni's face burned with humiliation. Her brother stood frozen on the stage, silent, unable to meet her eyes. Her parents looked away, pretending not to see their daughter being thrown out in front of strangers. As the guards pushed open the large glass doors, the night air hit her face, cold and sharp. Outside, the sky broke open and rain began to fall. The sound mixed with the muffled music from inside. Her dress clung to her skin, and her makeup washed away with her tears. She turned once, looking back through the glass at the family that had just abandoned her. Her voice was soft but steady, almost carried away by the rain. "You'll remember this night," she whispered. Then she turned and walked into the darkness alone, but with a fire quietly rising in her heart. There was a time when Abeni was the light of her family, the one everyone said would go far. She had a sharp mind and a quiet determination that made her teachers at school whisper about her potential. Numbers fascinated her. While others played, she'd sit under the mango tree behind their house, scribbling figures and balancing imaginary ledgers. She wanted to become an accountant, not for money but to prove she could build something of her own. But when she finished high school with top grades and presented her dream to her father, he laughed bitterly. "Why waste money on a girl who'll just marry?" he said, waving her papers away as if they meant nothing. Her mother said nothing, only lowering her eyes. That silence cut deeper than the words. From that day, Abeni learned she would have to walk alone. She found a small job as a cleaner at a local bank, mopping floors in the same halls where others counted money. Every morning she'd polish the tiles until they shone, and at night when the bank emptied she'd sit by the dim light, reading old accounting books left behind on desks. The guards would shake their heads saying, "This girl is wasting her time." But Abeni kept studying one formula, one page at a time. Months turned into years. She lived simply, saving every naira she could. Her clothes were worn, her meals often small, but her dream never shrank. Finally, her hard work paid off. She passed her exams and earned a certificate in accounting. Still, she didn't stop. She applied for scholarships secretly, writing essays late into the night, sometimes by candlelight when the power went out. One morning, a letter arrived from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. She had won a full scholarship. For a long moment she just stood there, trembling, tears rolling down her cheeks. She looked around her small rented room, the cracked walls, the thin mattress, and whispered, "I made it." Without telling her family, she packed her few belongings and left. While her brother was climbing through business connections, she was climbing through pure grit. Years later, while they laughed at parties, she was building something stronger, a life no one believed she could have. They forgot her, but she never forgot what they said. And one day, the world would remind them who Abeni Dlamini truly was. Years had passed since Abeni last saw her family. In that time, she had changed in ways they could never imagine. From the quiet girl who once cleaned office floors, she had risen step by step, not through luck, but through long nights, sleepless study, and unshakable discipline. In South Africa, she worked 2 part-time jobs while completing her master's degree in finance. Her professors spoke of her brilliance, her employers trusted her precision, and by the time she turned 26, she had become one of the youngest financial auditors at a major multinational firm. While her family threw parties and posed for photos beside luxury cars, Abeni lived quietly in a modest apartment overlooking Johannesburg's city lights. She didn't need to announce her success. Her peace came from knowing she had earned everything on her own. When colleagues spoke of powerful business families in Nigeria, she would sometimes smile quietly, knowing her brother's company was one of them, and that she had unknowingly risen high enough to one day cross paths with him again. Fate worked its strange magic. Within a few years, her firm expanded operations into West Africa, and Abeni was promoted to oversee several high-profile audits, including one that carried her own last name. The file arrived one morning on her desk, Dlamini Holdings Limited. Her breath caught for a moment as she read it. Her brother's signature was on every page. The same brother who once let her be dragged out of his party now depended on the accuracy of her approval to keep his business running smoothly. Still, she told no one. She carried her title with quiet strength, Chief Financial Auditor, respected and feared for her integrity. Her subordinates often said she was too calm under pressure, too humble for her position. One colleague once asked her, "How do you stay so patient with people who underestimate you?" Abeni smiled faintly and said, "They called me useless once. Let them believe it, until truth speaks louder than pride." And she meant it, because she knew that sooner or later, truth always finds its voice. And when it does, it doesn't need to shout. It simply reveals what's been hidden all along. The world was about to find out who Abeni Dlamini truly was. The next morning began like any other. The soft hum of computers filled Abeni's quiet office as sunlight poured through the glass windows. She sipped her tea slowly, ready to begin another routine day of work. Then her email notification chimed. At first, she didn't think much of it. Just another client issue. Another report waiting to be cleared. But when she opened the message, her heart skipped. The subject line read, "Urgent. Account flagged for suspicious funds. Auditor approval required." She scrolled down and saw the name that froze her breath. Dlamini Holdings Limited. For a moment, she just stared at the screen. That name carried years of pain. The laughter at her brother's party. The cruel words. The look in her father's eyes when he told her she wasn't worth the family's name. It all came flooding back in an instant. She leaned back in her chair, taking a slow breath. Policy was clear. When an account was flagged for suspicious movement of funds, it had to be reviewed immediately. The responsible auditor had the authority to freeze all transactions pending investigation. And this time that authority belonged to her. Her colleagues passed by, unaware of the storm building behind her calm face. Abeni opened the audit dashboard, scrolling through the figures. Millions in transactions, strange transfers between shell companies, unusual patterns. It was enough to trigger a freeze. Every line on the screen whispered the same truth. This was her brother's empire. For a moment she hesitated. She could almost hear her mother's voice pleading for peace, or her father's cold command telling her to stay in her place. But then she remembered that rainy night, standing outside humiliated while people laughed. That memory gave her strength. Her hand hovered over the button. Then, without anger or revenge, only quiet justice, she clicked Freeze Transaction. The system beeped, confirming the action. Just like that, millions of naira were locked. Kweku's empire, once untouchable, now stood still because of one woman. The one they called useless. Abeni whispered softly to herself, her eyes steady on the screen. For once, the one you threw away decides your fate. And she meant it. The girl they once mocked had just rewritten the balance of power. With a single click, chaos ripped through the mansion like a storm. Toriro's voice echoed through the marble halls, sharp and panicked. "Kweku, why are our cards declined?" she shouted, holding her phone as if it had betrayed her. "The staff salaries didn't go through. Even the gardener is calling." Kweku rushed in, still half-dressed, confusion tightening his jaw. "That's impossible," he muttered, dialing the bank immediately. The line clicked, and the calm voice of the bank manager came through. "Sir," he said politely, "your accounts have been temporarily frozen." Kweku's tone turned cold. "Frozen? On what grounds?" "There's been a flag for suspicious transactions, sir," the manager replied carefully. "It's under review by the corporate auditor. You'll need to speak directly with her." Kweku's patience snapped. "And who?" he growled. "Is the auditor who thinks they can touch my accounts?" The manager hesitated before replying. "Miss Abeni Dlamini, sir." For a heartbeat, silence filled the air. Then the phone slipped from Kweku's hand, clattering against the floor. Toriro stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "Abeni," she breathed. "Your useless sister? She did this." Kweku didn't answer. His mind was spinning, memories of the day he threw his sister out flashing before him. Her face, her trembling hands, her words. Now that same sister held the power to ruin him. Toriro's panic turned into rage. "Fix it," she screamed. "Call her. Tell her to unfreeze it. We have bills, staff, everything tied to that account." But Kweku just stood there, chest heaving, pride crumbling. For the first time in years he felt small. The mighty businessman, the man who once thought he ruled over everything, was suddenly powerless. He looked around his lavish mansion, the gold-framed art, the polished floors, the quiet servants watching from a distance. Everything he had built stood still, frozen just like his accounts. And in that silence, Kweku finally realized. The sister he had once abandoned had become the one person who could decide his fate. While Toriro continued to shout, he whispered under his breath, voice trembling with regret. "Abeni, what have I done?" The next morning, Kweku stormed into the bank headquarters like a man possessed. His usually polished appearance was rough, his tie loose, his eyes red from a sleepless night. Everyone in the lobby stopped to stare as he slammed his hand on the front desk. "I need to see the auditor in charge of my accounts. Now," he barked. The receptionist's voice trembled slightly. "Yes, sir, please wait." Moments later, 2 security officers appeared and politely escorted him to the top floor. The long hallway was silent, lined with glass walls and the faint hum of air conditioning. Kweku's heart pounded with every step. Finally, the door opened to a sleek glass office. Behind the desk sat Abeni, calm, confident, and radiant in a sharp black suit that spoke of quiet power. Her expression was unreadable as she looked up from her papers. "Good afternoon, Mr. Dlamini," she said, her tone professional and steady. "Please have a seat." Kweku froze. His throat went dry. "Abeni, I didn't know you worked here," he managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. She tilted her head gently, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips. "You never asked," she replied. He sank into the chair across from her, feeling suddenly small. The air between them was thick with the weight of the past. The night he'd thrown her out, her tears, his cruel words. Now she sat across from him, holding the power he once used against her. Abeni opened the file in front of her, her fingers moving with quiet precision. "It seems several of your company's accounts are under review," she said evenly. "But don't worry." She paused, meeting his eyes. "I'll handle everything professionally." Her words were polite, but the calm in her voice carried strength, the kind that comes from surviving what was meant to destroy you. Kweku swallowed hard. The arrogance that once fueled him was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar: humility. For the first time, he truly saw his sister not as the girl he dismissed, but as a woman of power and grace. In that glass office, surrounded by silence, the tables had turned. The man who once thought he controlled her fate now sat before her, waiting for mercy. That evening, the sky hung heavy with gray clouds as Abeni stood before the house she once called home. The gates, which had once been slammed in her face, creaked open slowly. She walked up the same cracked path where she used to carry buckets of water as a child, back when her dreams were smaller than the walls that confined her. Her mother opened the door before she could knock. Her face was pale, eyes swollen from crying. "Abeni," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your brother says you froze his company's accounts. Please, my daughter, undo it. You'll destroy us." Abeni stood still, her heart heavy but her spirit unshaken. She looked around the familiar living room, the same faded curtains, the family portraits that never included her graduation photo, the chair where her father once told her she was nothing. "Mama," she said quietly, her voice steady but full of pain. "When they called me useless, did you defend me?" Her mother's lips quivered, but no words came. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "We were wrong. All of us. We didn't see who you were. You're the one holding this family together now." The words broke something inside Abeni. Not anger but years of buried hurt. She took a slow breath, looking at her mother not with hate but with sorrow. "I'm not here for revenge," she said softly. "I'm here for accountability." Her mother sank to her knees, clutching Abeni's hand. "We didn't know," she sobbed. "We were blind." Abeni helped her up gently. "Maybe now you'll see," she murmured, "the value of the one you cast aside." For a moment, silence filled the room. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, soft, echoing like the sound of pride collapsing. The same pride that had built walls between them was now crumbling, brick by brick. As Abeni turned to leave, her mother called out, "Will you forgive us?" Abeni paused at the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light. "Forgiveness is already in my heart," she said, "but change must live in yours." And with that, she walked away, not out of anger but peace. The woman they once called useless now carried the weight of her family's redemption in quiet strength. Weeks passed like a slow healing wind. The investigation that had shaken the Dlamini family finally came to an end. The truth surfaced. Kweku's accounts were clean, but Toriro had been secretly moving company funds into her own name. Her luxury handbags, cars, and endless parties had all been bought with stolen money. When the news broke, the media feasted on it, and Toriro vanished from the public eye overnight. For For Kweku, the shame was unbearable. The brother who once mocked Abeni now stood stripped of pride, watching everything he built nearly collapse because of the woman he trusted most. His phone buzzed with unanswered calls, his mansion sat silent. In the end, he gathered what was left of his dignity and drove to Abeni's office. When he entered, she was reviewing documents, calm and composed, her aura different. No longer the timid sister, but a woman who carried authority with grace. Without a word, Kweku sank to his knees before her desk. "Abeni," he said softly, his voice cracking, "I don't deserve forgiveness, but thank you for saving what's left." Abeni's eyes glistened. She had dreamed of this moment once. Not the apology but the acknowledgement. She rose, walked around the desk, and helped him to his feet. "It's not about what you deserve," she said gently. "It's about doing what's right." Over the next few days, she worked side by side with Kweku to rebuild the company's structure. Every unpaid worker received their salaries. Contracts were cleaned, debts were cleared, and for the first time the business stood on honesty, not ego. When everything was finally stable, Abeni signed one last document, the creation of the Surwa Initiative, a scholarship foundation for young girls who, like her, were once told their dreams didn't matter. She named it after her late teacher, Madame Surwa, the only person who had believed in her potential when her own family did not. As she left the office that day, the city lights glimmered across the Lagos skyline. The same world that had laughed at her now whispered her name with respect. Abeni Dlamini had not just redeemed her family. She had rewritten their legacy a year later. The Dlamini mansion glowed again with lights and laughter, but this time, the air felt different. The chandeliers shimmered softly, and the music played not for ego, but for gratitude. Kweku stood at the center of the hall, no longer the proud man he once was, but a brother who had learned humility. He raised his glass and announced, his voice filled with emotion, "Tonight, we celebrate the woman who rebuilt what pride destroyed, my sister Abeni Dlamini." The crowd erupted in applause. Business partners, government officials, and employees from across the city rose to honor her. Abeni walked up the stage slowly, dressed in a graceful gold gown. Her confidence wasn't loud, it was quiet, steady, and earned. She smiled gently, looking over the same family that once turned their backs on her. When she took the microphone, her voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced the room. "When they called me useless," she said softly, "I learned something powerful. People's opinions don't define your value. Your work does. Your dignity does. And how you rise after being broken, that's your true crown." The audience cheered, some with tears in their eyes. Even Kweku bowed his head in respect. The camera moved across the crowd, and in the far corner Toriro stood alone watching quietly. She wore no jewels, no arrogance, just a simple dress and remorse in her eyes. She clapped softly, not out of obligation, but out of deep realization. Abeni looked toward her for a brief moment, their eyes meeting. There was no hatred, no vengeance, only peace. A silent forgiveness passed between them, unspoken but powerful. As the music swelled again, Abeni stepped down from the stage, greeting guests, smiling humbly. The same mansion that once echoed with mockery now rang with respect. The lights reflected in her eyes, not as a sign of luxury, but as a symbol of survival. And as the narrator's voice faded in, the camera lingered on her face, calm, radiant, unshaken. "They dragged her out like she was nothing," the voice said softly. "But when the storm cleared, she stood taller than everyone who tried to break her.